A lot of people like to talk about consistency and how it's so damn important. Consistency beats intensity. That's something that I say all the time. And I 100% agree that consistency wins the game and at the end. But what I've noticed is I think how we define consistency is what sets people up for failure in a lot of cases. For instance, the other day, I'm scrolling around the social medias, just kind of tooling around, seeing what's out there. And I see somebody talking about how they're like, be consistent and produce like a video every day for 100 days or 100 videos, produce 100 blog posts, produce 100 social media posts. And then they're talking about consistency. And I look at that and I'm like, 100, that's not consistency. That's nothing. That's barely getting your foot in the game. And I guess it all comes down to framing expectations. Because if you go into something thinking, oh, I just need to be consistent for the next 100 days, you're more than likely going to be disappointed when you get to the end of those 100 days or the 100 reps or whatever the thing is, and you realize, oh, 100 was just getting me into the stadium. I'm not even we haven't even blown the whistle yet. And so when I think of consistency, I think at least 1 year as the bare minimum for an activity to be able to say I've been consistently doing this thing. So that means you need, if that's reaching out to 100 clients every day, then you need to do that for a year for it to be consistent. You need to put out your video, your content every day for a year. And I was just looking at some stats on Twitter. I've posted at least 2 tweets every single day for 2 years. Same with LinkedIn. Same with, this podcast is a good example of it too. We've released an episode every single day for the last year and a month. Consistency just looks different at different levels of the game. And I think the more you can reprogram your mind to think in larger increments when it comes to consistency, the more likely you are to keep showing up and doing the work, even though you're not seeing the results in the time frame that you want to. For instance, this podcast, we have released over 370 episodes in the last year. So that's an episode every single day for the last year and a month. That's a lot of episodes. And I would say this podcast has still not found its legs yet. It's still in the early innings. And so I'm not even going to really judge the results of this podcast yet for another year. So we'll review when we get to 700 episodes and we'll say, okay, how are we looking now? And so if at any point before that, at episode 20 or episode 80 or episode 120, I had stopped and said, okay, how are we looking? I've been consistent. Am I getting the results that I want? I would look at that then and say, it's not worth the effort. Just from, a time input to output ratio. It's like, I would be better spent doing other things with my time than this podcast. For instance, spending the time on the main YouTube channel, which has 150,000 subscribers rather than this podcast, which only has a couple thousand, right? But we're judging the output too soon because we haven't shown up enough. We haven't shown up consistently enough. And so just reframing your expectation of how much you need to do and how consistently you need to show up, I think can really be helpful because it stops us from prematurely judging ourselves. And then because we prematurely judge ourselves, we're not finding ourselves wanting. And I think that's really important. And I've seen this play out multiple times. For instance, we have another podcast called Multifamily Investing Made Simple. This is the podcast we put out multiple episodes every week for the last 3.5 years. And for the first year and a half, I didn't look at a single analytic. I didn't look at any of the downloads, anything like that. Didn't care about it. It was just about showing up, building the consistency, building the muscle, and doing the work. So a year and a half in, I look at the analytics, and it's a good thing I hadn't looked because literally up until a month before I had looked at the analytics, the podcast was just doing abysmal. Like if you just looked at it, you'd be like, I'm demoralized. It's not worth the time and the energy. Let's scrap this thing. But then a month before I, through pure serendipity, a month before I looked at the statistics of the analytics, the channel took off just out of nowhere, just took off. And it kind of kept on that trajectory for a while. And that's all to say. If you judge your results too soon, you might give up mere inches away from the goal. And you just don't know. You have no way of knowing if you need to stay the course a little bit longer or not. But in my experience, people quit too soon more often than they quit too late. I see very few people quit too late. That's almost never the issue. The issue is that they came into it with expectations framed too low and they gave up too soon. So I share this with you because in the game of entrepreneurship, in the game of creating content online, like whatever the things that you're playing at, like it might take longer to succeed than you think. But you can't win if you don't start. You can't lose if you don't quit. So I encourage you, be consistent, keep showing up, and be prepared to play the game for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. If you do that, it's very, very hard to imagine you won't find success. So I hope this brings you guys some value. As always, thank you for being here. I'll catch you back around these parts tomorrow. But until then, stay hyper-focused, my friends.